Andy, what do you do if you have a difficult boss?
Change job. No, actually, actually, it's probably worth starting with that because there might be situations where life is short and it's toxic enough that it's just not worth it. Okay, so that's a potential. But that said, I can think of probably my most difficult boss I ever had, Stuart, and I grew so much under that boss that instead of starting with "I'm out of here," some things I guess I've learned along this one is what if I just take a step back and say, in the best sense of the word, turn it into a game. And this is what I mean.
Mm.
What would it take to win this person? What would it take to win this person? And I say this, Stuart, because we have 5 children, and the 3 oldest, actually all 5 of them now have played soccer. The 2 youngest ones are playing soccer now too, or football. It's called football, right? But the 3 oldest were keepers, and my 3rd child is a daughter. And when she was in the nets as a keeper, she had a really, really, really tough coach and would yell, and not just at her, to everybody. But she tried to turn it into a little bit of a game. Like, hey, he didn't yell as much today, and today he didn't yell at me at all. Now, by the way, I'm not giving any room for people who are truly yelling or toxic or bullying. I'm not saying that, but this idea of what if I hung in there and tried to win the person, or at least neutralize their impact. So it's not hurting my career, it's not hurting our projects and things like that. But it's starting from a posture of they're not really necessarily out to get me. No, they might, but what would it take? And I've got situations where, well, with that tough boss I was talking about, I'm a very laid back person, like very relaxed. And so I'd be in meetings, I'd be kicked back, cracking jokes. And some meetings, I'm not kidding. Yeah, right. Yeah. But yeah, I know. I'm aghast. But in some meetings, I'd actually take my shoes off because why not be comfortable, right? So I'm a vice president of systems at this point. She's a senior VP, and she is a hard charging, like very driving sort of personality. Now, I was just being who I am, and she's being who she is, but how is she going to view Mr. No Shoes On, laid back, cracking jokes? Yeah. I mean, realistically, from her standpoint, I don't look like VP material, probably looking like I'm a slacker, like I'm not taking things seriously. And so I could blame her. And I think during a good chunk of my reporting to her, I kind of did. Yeah. She's a dictator. She's unrealistic, there's all kinds of things I could blame it on. But after a while, like I was with the chief information officer just a couple of weeks ago, and he goes, "There's always you, them, and the outcome. Now, how many of those can you control?" His point is only you. Right? Yeah. And so, what can I do to start adjusting? So, like, what would you coach me to do, Stuart? I'm Mr. Laid back, cracking joke. What would you? Keep my shoes on. Let's start with that one. But what else? Anything else you'd recommend I do?
Well, I guess really what they want to do is see that you're taking the role seriously. Right. And the way that they perceive you taking it seriously is the way that they feel they take it seriously. So it's almost like mirroring their behaviors.
Brilliant. Yeah. So it can start with, if she's more of a leaning forward, I tend to use a lot of diminishers in my speech. See, I just said it. I tend. Yeah. Right? And so I might say to her things like, well, perhaps, or, we could do this. What she wanted was, here's the plan. Here's what we're doing. So remove some of those diminishers, be more clear with what the risks are, be more focused. There's times where humor really works well. And there's other times where this is not the time for humor. And so when I say, like, treat it as a game, like, well, what would it take to win her or him? Like, what would it take to adjust? And I suppose it's fair to say there are some people that you maybe won't ever win, but start there. At least start with the idea of the 3, what can I change? How does that affect them? How does that affect the outcomes? And I started making those changes, and things did get better with her. I mean, after a while, she's like, things are coming around. I'm like, I just learned how to speak her language. That's all it was. I might as well have been speaking Swahili to her the way I was, interacting with her before. So learning to adjust. And I don't want to suggest that that's an overnight thing.
Mm.
No,
Yeah.
it can take some time. One chief information officer told me, he said, credibility is currency. You want more currency? It's credibility. Now he wasn't even really talking about a paycheck currency. He's talking about a voice. And a lot of times a PMO doesn't have sufficient voice in the organization. And if we look at it as credibility, credibility is what leads to currency. You want more of a voice, we have to deliver. And so learn, like, what does deliver mean from their perspective? Like, how do they want the information presented?
Yeah.
I've got a client where their boss, she said her boss always wants status reports in pastel colors. It's like every week it's Easter and spring, but she adjusted to what the boss wanted. And so it's like, what do I need to do to try to win this person or neutralize them? And I don't mean neutralize in the mafia sense of the word. Like, no, but it's like, what would it take to try to adjust it? And sometimes progress can be made.
Okay. So I'm thinking then when you actually reflect back on your experience with that boss, you probably don't perceive her as actually the difficult boss anymore, that she was actually instructional in a development that you needed to have as part of your career. So would you agree with that?
Well, it's interesting because I've had some distance now since reporting to that boss, and after years of therapy. No, but I will say at the time, I think when I left that company, I still would not have said that she was my best boss ever. I don't think so, but I can say that definitively now. And the reason I say that is that when I reflect back, I had bosses that I liked better. Like it was easier to develop a relationship with, but it's almost like the tough coach that gets more out of their team, but the team loves that difficult coach, even though maybe fans or the press, sees a different side of it. And I think when I look back to reporting to that person, like I said, I just grew more under their leadership. But if I relived it, I think I would try to appreciate that at the moment. And so if a listener's thinking about, there's no way I can appreciate this boss, I mean, they're just a jerk. And once again, that may be, but there is a academic definition of bullying. And a lot of times people say, my boss is a bully. And I think those bosses are out there, but you know what, Stuart? I think most of the people that we call bullies aren't bullies. They're just tough personalities or demanding bosses. And if we can just take this perspective of maybe there's something there, maybe there's some things I can do to adjust, never compromising our values of who we are. We don't have to change who we are. But in my case, I had to adjust my interactions. So I wasn't changing who I am at the core. And by the way, I interviewed Herminia Ibarra. She's a London Business School professor. And she says a fascinating thing in her book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. She says, sometimes we use authenticity as an excuse to not change, which is interesting. So somebody may go, well, for me to change to that person, that just wouldn't be authentic. And I get that mindset. Authenticity is important, but there's also this thing of, as a VP in the company, like I had some responsibilities to understand how do things work. And so it gave me this opportunity, although I don't remember a day that I liked it, but it gave me this opportunity to grow some thicker skin and to be more prepared and not just be like the university student who doesn't study and gets an A. It's like, wait, I'm not getting an A here with this boss. So I need to study, so to speak. I need to get more prepared. And there's all kinds of things in life where we grow more through the difficult thing and it builds resilience than on the easy days, And so I would say if somebody's got a really difficult boss, it might be one of those things that if we take advantage of it, it might be the thing that just ruins your life, but it might be the thing that actually helps me just grow in a way that I wouldn't have if I didn't have that boss.
Thank you, Andy. That was Andy Kaufman from the People and Projects podcast, the link to which is in the description. So we spent a bit of time there talking about difficult bosses, but we didn't talk about my difficult bosses, and that's because I've already made that video. It's right here, and it's worth a look.